Okay, good morning, everybody. So this is Life After Landmark. And this morning we have a bit of a rock star so far in the landmark world, in that who Anne Peterson was working with was Werner directly. And she's recently written a book, as you can see in the background. It's called Is This a Cult? And we have been talking. There's so much to share with you. And I thought that we'd get Anne on just to hear from her point of view what her life has been like after Landmark, since writing the book and since going public. But first of all, Anne, please share a little more about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm so excited really to be here with you because I went through, and my book describes my journey after 20 some years of being as my daughter would say, a landmarkian. And I did all the things, I did the programs, and then I became a program leader. I led the Introduction Leaders program for a short period of time. And then I led a self-expression and leadership program. And then I did the wisdom course, and I decided I was meant to be a wisdom course leader, and I became a wisdom course leader. And then I became a staff wisdom course leader, which means in the landmark world, of course, a whole other distinction of being a staff member. But my staff position was to lead fill, produce, and lead a senior graduate program. And then as I kind of was sort of winding down out of that in a certain way, kind of thinking like, hey, I actually thought for a long time, I thought I would be a staff member forever and ever and ever. And that was the tallest mountain I could ever imagine climbing. And so then some different things happened, and I was like, oh, I think I'm gonna like move on. And and in the process of thinking about that, I got invited to host Werner and a group of colleagues as they set off on an adventure to create and introduce an ontological approach to leadership development into academia. And I was like, wow, yeah, I mean, all I ever wanted was to have the ontological approach, right? Being learning about, I can actually have something to say about who I'm being in life, and that's going to influence my actions, etc. All I ever wanted was that to be like everywhere. So to be part of a project to put that into academia was a huge honor. And so as I started in that project, and the book really focuses in on that journey, that kind of transitioning from my immediate landmark career, which was about 12, maybe 15 years. And then to take on that project as I figured out what I wanted to do next. It was kind of a little side project. Well, that side project became the next 9 years of my life. And in the course of that project is, I don't want to give away too much of the books for people who haven't read it, but I start to find out some things. And not the least of which is a lot of the things that I had been told as an up-and-coming landmark leader about Werner, his engagement, his participation, his role in the enterprise that is Landmark, was different than what I had been told. And over the course of that time, you kind of start taking in all this information, and it's like, oh, well, okay, whatever, but that doesn't matter now, or whatever you tell yourself. And then in 2020, some really devastating news sort of got piled on, like a number of things all at once. And the primary of which being that a number of Werner's staff came to me for help because they were experiencing physical and verbal abuse and assault. I mean, is what it's by legal terms, what it would be called. And they had questions about everything from, is this appropriate business behavior to, is this bad? Is this a good practice? Is this a bad practice? There are some also practices around pay refunds and all this stuff. I outline it a little bit in the book. But basically, in that moment, I find out this organization that I had at that point devoted 25 years, the majority of my adult life. I started participating when I was 27. I was a leader by 30. I'm now 55. I started finding out, hey, this wasn't what I thought it was. Like, something's not right here. And then I began studying and reading and talking and to experts and professionals. And I really did start with the question like, wait, am I in a cult? Like it was a real, like the name of the book, people are like, oh, it's clickbait. Da, da, da. I'm like, no, no, no. It was the authentic question that when I start finding out this stuff, because right along with learning about so Werner's abuse, which, I'm kind of like, okay, another old white guy beating up on and abusing his power. It's like not that new of a story, not that hard to believe. But then I started finding out about Landmark. People had gone to Landmark for help, which is run by his brother and sister, and which supplies a lot of the staff for him. Not they covered up. They didn't say, oh, it's terrible, but let's help, and that was really heartbreaking for me. That was the moment that I really started to question, like, wait, what am I involved in? Because they were acting, the higher ups in Landmark's behavior was so contrary to the work that as I understood it, that I had been teaching for years. I couldn't figure out why would they act that way. And that had me go back and start really investigating the history of the total history of the organization, the characters involved, and started. And then I had some reporters call me and start asking me questions. And as I'm answering some of their questions, I realized, like, I kind of sound funny, they're at, and I'm like, well, wait, maybe there's something going on here that even I don't truly understand. And a funny little side note, because when I ran into you, Dale, you had done an interview, which I only found your interview after my book came out. I don't know how. I used to search for Werner information and stuff when I was selling a program featuring him, and I never found any of this stuff. And I found somebody sent me your interview with Chris Shelton. I don't know, maybe 3-4 weeks. And I was so excited. I listened to the whole thing, the whole 2 hours. And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody else is now talking about the stuff that doesn't work in Landmark. Because it was so taboo. And I wrote the book, and I thought that was the end of my life. I was never, like, nobody was ever going to speak to me again. I was not, I was going to be literally, my best friend told me I was going to be a pariah. And but then lo and behold, there's some other people out there that are kind of talking about this. So I was super excited. And then I started talking to everybody I know that had any connection to Australia to find you. I'm like on Facebook, I'm on whatever to find you. And just to have somebody else to talk with about all this stuff.
There's so much to talk about. There's just so much. I want to backtrack a little bit to a couple of things.
Yeah.
One is ontology. So first of all, just how we were explained it when we arrived at Landmark. So this was, my era was 96 to 2002. And there was a huge transition. So this is part of is this a cult? We were sold it as ontology. So it's ontology being the study of being. So and I've heard this through Scientology as well. They have the be, do, have.
Yeah.
So that's what we were trained in. If you be something, then you do something, then you can have something. But we've got it normally around the other way. Have something, do something, and be something. So it's a pretty important distinction, because that also changed. So during the period I was there was a huge a global event to retrain people into Landmark then being about transformation. And that involved the agreements, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. The Landmark Forum leaders who sign an agreement for life, they could finish their contract and they would have to begin a new one under this new guise of Landmark Education Corporation. So that is, is this a cult? These are big practices, actually. This whole transformation of the company, and then everybody involved is just hauled along and retrained into this whole new language. And not only language with this transformation of the company, it was in our being. So I just wanted to put that in, because
that's the transition. Are you speaking of the transition from LEC 1997 to 2020?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. I was at the big event in LA where that happened. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was in Melbourne, and they had, so I was in Perth, was the centre that I worked at, which is on one side of the country. It's kind of like LA to California to New York. It's about that distance. So the event was held in Melbourne. There was only 5 places in the world where this event happened. And everybody who was anybody had to go. So that was, as a staff person, I was employed. So it was compulsory. There was no question about it. But anybody who was in the leadership body had to pay for themselves to fly over to this event, pretty standard. I think it was 2 days. I can't remember.
It was a hand. I have a really funny story about that event because I was a brand new introduction leader. So I had just, well, maybe I was a year in, actually. I wasn't quite that new but I was still like in the throes of being a new leader, right? And I was leading the major events. So the big, the forum, the advanced course, the evening sessions. I was one of the main room managers. I was an event manager. I would manage the big guest events, and I was leading these guest events. And I had just started a relationship with my now husband. His name's Dave. So we're still married 25 years later. But the LEC 2020 event was very early in our relationship. And, and having a relationship, given I was a new leader, he was the registration manager, it was a big deal. We had to get permission. There was it was full of all kinds of titillating excitement, right? But we get permission, we start our relationship. My kids to this day will tell you they went to grandma's for the summer, they came back, he moved in, he never left, right? Because of course, we created a whole possibility, like it was all inside of it. Was definitely a landmark fever dream. And so we're at this big event, and I got to go. I don't remember if I had to pay my way or not, but he was a staff member, so I got to stay with him. I barely remember the event because I was like all in my like the hot and exciting period with the new love of my life, who I at the time called the Prince of Possibility, right? Because I had found my prince. And he was, and I had left my abusive husband. I tell the story lightly in the book, but it's just add all the drama and flair you could imagine for like a Hallmark movie or something. But here we are at this big event. I do think you're right. I think it's 2 days. And I'm like kind of hanging out with all the cool people because I'm Dave's new love. So I'm hanging out with the like staff and the leaders and like all this stuff. Somebody told me recently that Werner was at my event or watching. I have no memory of any of it at all. The only thing I remember about that event is the energy, the excitement, some of the social events. And then the point, did you guys have this where you stood up and you got to say you were going to be responsible for, or you were going to be accountable for? I can't remember. I feel like there was 3, but the top one was you were declaring yourself accountable for the fulfillment of the future. LEC 2020 is what it was called. And, that was it. It was like a nun taking a vow. It was, you were that your life was in service of that future being fulfilled, and you were dedicating your life to that. And it was so exciting and so purpose-filled. And I remember then fast forward to the actual 2020, and by now they've reinvented at least 2 more times that I know of, right? By the time then I left in 2012 was the last time I led a official landmark event, but then I went right to hosting for Werner. So now I'm hosting this program for Werner and the group of colleagues he was working with, and then I'm in touch with all the like landmark higher ups, right? Like now I'm kind of in the higher up echelons. They've gone through 3 or 4 reinventions. We do the last Being a Leader course in 2019. It does not escape my attention that I am now reinventing my life in the year 2020. And I was so excited about that, right? I was like, this is it. Like, I got it. I've done all this stuff. I was successful. I made it all the way up to working with the source, and traveled the world and just all this stuff. And now I'm going to invent what's next, and how perfect that it's in the year 2020. And I host this. It was just like all this grand stuff. until March, the pandemic comes. But then the pandemic is like the least of my problems. Landmark threatens me if I try to do anything that includes Landmark graduates, because, you know, I'm not supposed to have Landmark graduates do anything that isn't Landmark or Landmark endorsed. You know, I find out that the guru, the source, is abusive. I find out the organization is not only complicit, they're going to cover it up. And you know, like all of a sudden, like my whole structure, my whole mental structure that is crumbling in a way that I just couldn't have possibly imagined in as I know, like that event that you're speaking of in that moment. But I'll tell you, Dale, what I now know, I've studied a lot. I haven't changed anything. So they have these reinventions.
That's exactly right. And that's why I did the interview with Chris Shelton. He was a little bit reluctant because it had been so long since I left. But I'm like, nobody else is talking. Nobody. I watched all of these ex-Scientology interviews and waiting for somebody to say Landmark. And there were like brief mentions, Werner Erhard, like the connection between L. Ron Hubbard and the human potential movement. You know, there was a whole wave of new ideas coming through and different ways to present them. So it was really accepted. It was after the 60s, and it was free love, and everybody was just open to these new ways of bringing in through information. So I just kept waiting. And then I said to Chris, look, all I want to know is, has anything changed? And if the things I'm talking about are still relevant, in the architecture, nothing is changing. And they're talking about transformation. It's like the individual has to transform. We have to turn everything inside out, upside down to transform ourselves. Then the company, and I think this is the what really got me, was I could see that, or I was experiencing these, it's kind of like the people that were telling me how to live my life, I was questioning whether they'd done the work. It's like, you know, I remember seeing Joan Rosenberg at one of our staff conferences, and I said to my colleague, has she done the Introduction Leaders program? How can she get away with that hair? It was just like she looked like she was from a time warp. She wasn't, she just wasn't catching up with modern times. They all looked like, when I looked at the back of the room, I could see these little old ladies doing their thing. It's all sitting on computers. They weren't, you know, watching us in the room. Anyway, so these are some of the things that got me questioning. So there's that. And then also in what you said about accountable. So one of the things was that I'd never heard that word before. And we were trained to account for our time, basically. That was the whole issue of this, was we had to account for every single minute that we worked for the company. I think the reason that they brought accountability in was because the productivity levels were getting so low. I would sit on the phone. So when to get a sense of this transformation, I would sit on the phone for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes, coaching or talking people into registering. And then when mobile phones came out, you know, we were sitting there for the same amount of time on calling a mobile phone. And at that stage, mobile phones were really expensive. Really expensive. To talk to somebody for two hours, and no exaggeration, it was really like these really long phone calls. It was like a marathon, just wearing somebody out until they said, yes, they'll register. So, and one time the business and finance manager came to all of the centers around Australia to find out what we were doing to have these long, like these phone bills that had gone exponentially off the radar. They were so expensive. So then this accountability came in, and we had to account for each time, and we would each minute of the day, and we had to learn how to register somebody in a shorter amount of time. I think that was one of the essences of this huge transformation. So there's that, and then and accountable, I'd never heard, it wasn't like what we hear now. And that was the thing that got me curious about Landmark. They seemed to be leading the way with language. It was like we were learning all the cool ways to talk, and then I'd notice corporations would pick it up later. So we were ahead of the game. And hearing this word accountable, I was like, no idea what it means, what it is. Today, you know, people are throwing it around left, right, and center. But at that point, we had to learn what being accountable was. And that's what I say, the Landmark Forum leaders were given the chance to complete their old agreement and renew it. And a lot of them left. Well, not a lot, but there were some old timers that had worked with Werner Erhard as EST, the Werner Erhard seminar.
Yeah.
But this also brings me to another question for you, is that you dropped in, it's kind of, I think we're so familiar with with the language and with the way it works that it kind of makes sense to us. But there's a couple of things that you've said already that I'm sure people are like, what? She needed permission for her to get married? What, you know, what does she mean, landmark? Like you said it really succinctly, landmark, there was a difference between where you were working with the wisdom course and landmark. So can you please explain the structure that you were employed by and how that differed from landmark?
So it was still Landmark, but it was a division. So it was this separate sort of division that had a certain amount of autonomy. And we had programs. Our programs were for senior level graduates. So people who'd already done the core programs, the forum, the advanced course, self-expression and leadership. And it was really designed to be, it was a supportive, it was a good money maker because our programs, I mean, my program was a year long and $3,000. So you had to have a certain level of affluence and success. And, you know, I used to open my program with, you know, when I got to leading the wisdom course, I'm like, okay, you've transformed, you've transformed. I'm here to now kind of undo some of that transformation, meaning mostly to undo now what I would call indoctrination. I didn't have that terminology then, but like to teach you how to talk like a normal person, be a normal person. But also the wisdom course is not about you really anymore and working on yourself. It's about sort of understanding the phenomenon of you. You know, it was sort of a higher fluting. If you were to compare it to a college setting, it's sort of like we were the master's program. And we weren't going to be working on fixing you so much anymore because you're fixed. You're whole, you're complete, you're perfect. You were always fixed. Ha, 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 you know, whatever. So, because it's one of the things you're always doing in these programs, and this isn't unique just to Landmark, but you're constantly telling people two things. You're creating a kind of cognitive dissonance all the time, which is you have these problems. This is broken. We can fix it. But here's the fix. You're whole, complete, and perfect. You were never broken in the first place. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. And, you know, Landmark's programs, I now know, are based in a lot of age-old wisdom. Heidegger, Nietzsche, you know, there's a lot about, you know, there's definitely a lot of Scientology that was taken as well. But even those ideas are based in kind of some ancient wisdom that's been sort of taken and twisted and, you know, simplified in a big way. And but this is now a hallmark. So I now understand this as a hallmark of cult and cultish groups is redefining words, changing what they mean. So as a wisdom leader, I was kind of like returning people back to normal. And it was known, it was a lot about who human beings are as a social creatures. We had a lot of social events, a lot of fun. The core, we weren't about intervening on your thinking. Our program was really delivered through listening, you know, listening for what was available, what was possible. We were, you know, presenting processes and ideas, and then really just providing a reflective listening, and people could kind of find their own insights. I think I often liken it to, it was part of Landmark, but, you know, like, so I'm an American, so I, you know, always have United States examples. But the United States is a giant place, and part of the United States is Hawaii, right? And Hawaii is beautiful. It's tropical paradise. It's totally separated from the United States, but is completely part of the United States. Same laws, same culture to a certain extent, you know, all that stuff. And so I'm over in Hawaii, and Hawaii is pretty great. And Hawaii has some different sets of rules to it and so on. And then I come back to the mainland. And I think this is part of why I was able to see a lot of what I saw and see that it wasn't right. Because I'd been over in Hawaii, and so I come back to the mainland and I'm like, what? Why are you processing people about who they're being that result didn't happen? You know, like it just was sort of weird for me in some ways to kind of come back into the way the centers division, which is the primary division, when most people think of Landmark and their participation, that's what they encounter. That's where the core programs are hosted. The forum, the advanced course are hosted through the centers division. And then you have the wisdom division, which is this kind of graduate playground. And then you have what was Landmark Education Business, which became Vanto Group, which is Landmark's work in organizations. And then they fast forward as they go through the years, they eventually sort of start buying up all the spin-offs. So they buy up a licensing group that licenses the right to use Werner's ideas and applications in business organizations to management consultants. So they buy that, you know, they bring that under the fold. That's the technical licensees. And that kind of creates these funny conflicts because you have Landmark Business Development that does the work in businesses, but they're kind of in competition with these management consultants. So there's a bunch of, and even the wisdom area was sort of kind of in competition with the centers, but it was very drilled into us that no matter what, if the centers wanted that person, say, to do the leadership development program, and it had many names, it's currently being called the Leadership Academy. It was the Introduction Leaders Program. It was the Introduction to Forum Leaders Program. It was Guest Seminar Leader Program. I mean, but it's all the same program. And, you know, that was basically an assisting program. And, you know, we would literally take somebody out of a $3,000, what kind of business choice is this? $3,000 revenue producing course to go volunteer in the leaders training program because they had a target to meet, and they're always trying to create leaders because if you create leaders, you expand the enterprise. Except, so I've participated in 1997, I believe, 96 or 97. I've now studied the organization going back quite a ways. And they've pretty much had the same number of senior leaders for most of the 50 years. It always ranges between 35 to 55 or so. So their leadership development program in 50 years turned through a lot of different people, but never really expanded the program. That was ongoingly an issue, right? So anyway, so that was a wisdom area. Yeah, it was this whole kind of graduate thing, and we were going to return people sort of being normal people and using normal
so
language.
I do want to talk about the leadership program because I think this is where it gets really weird. After my interview with Chris Shelton, I've had a lot of people contact me, and they're people that have done the forum, the 3 days and one evening. We can't forget the one evening because the one evening completes on Tuesday night. And you've just given a beautiful overview of how big the company really is. So people that enter the forum for 3 days and one evening, they do this 3-day course and they're like, oh, it's not a cult. What do you mean? It's just, you know, it's a personal development kind of course. And what I found really interesting as well is that Raymond Fowler, who is the clinical psychologist, the person that we would always refer to as, he says it's not a cult, but the languaging is really important. He says the Landmark Forum is not a cult. Well, I'm not questioning the Landmark Forum. I'm questioning the company, Landmark Education. And the leadership program is where it gets really weird. I mean, so
that's where the indoctrination into the cultish that really begins, is in the leadership. But this goes to something we were saying earlier, because you're stepping from being a consumer, a beneficiary of, and the only responsibility you have at that level is you are responsible for the value you're getting. That's another thing you'll find similarly between all these groups. And by the way, the forum is an LGAT, and that's something that I want to bring back into the language, because that's something, and I don't actually think LGATs, they're problematic, but they're not necessarily horrible, right? So, but it is important to understand.
And let's break down the distinction. LGAT is a large gathering awareness
Large group awareness
training. Yeah. So this is the thing, we just kind of go through all these acronyms and people are like, what?
Yeah. So in LGAT, you'll find that. But then you go, as soon as you go into that leadership program, now you're taking on, you're asking, and you have to request, you're requesting to be considered to be somebody who would be responsible for the organization.
And represent the organization. Therefore, in representing, there's a particular way to dress, there's a particular way to speak, and there's a particular way to be. So coming back to this ontology, there's a beingness that Landmark gets to the core of. And this is where, for me, that's where it gets really dangerous territory, because people start to be a different way, that they like there's a kind of, you have to be able to represent the company, because they want a particular image to be shown to the world. That is, you know, that we follow the law. So we have 6 months, so there's 6 months training. We get documentation. I think it was something like 30 pages in how to lead an introduction to the forum to have people register. So the cost of the course was, I don't know, $400 for 6 months.
Phenomenal. And it was waived if you had to travel.
Right.
The tuition was waived if you had to travel to do the training weekend.
And so people from like 2 or 3 hours away would come to Perth to do the training. They would have to drive, also long hours. So there were 4 weekends and then every Friday night. So they would drive 3 hours to get to the course at 6 p.m. on a Friday evening, and they could stay until maybe 1 or 2 o'clock and in the morning, and need to drive back and then come back the following day, or they would obviously stay overnight for the weekends. So the fee was nominal, but the resource was our time. So we were investing our time to be trained to be a different way, to learn a different way, to communicate, to have people register, want to register into the Landmark Forum. So the training was basically going over this, say it's 30-page, I can't remember exactly, 30-page document to learn it verbatim, word for word, with the intonations, with the enthusiasm, with killer shares.
Remember, you had to be able to create, you had to be able to recreate it and then create from it. Let's see how much I can remember here, menopause brain. But the first thing was to just be able to recreate it, to actually be able to read the words on the page as the words on the page appear. And then the next thing was you're creating from it. So now I'm still saying the words, but I'm kind of owning the words. You know, I understand them. I'm actually creating them in my speaking. And then eventually, I can't remember what the thing was, but what you're going for ultimately is a level of mastery. And mastery is when you become the words.
It's like being the author.
Yes.
So I am the author. I wrote this. This is mine. These are my words. Yeah, I become.
My speaking. Yeah.
So then there's, in one of the weekends, there's self-expression. And this is where we did the poems. That's what I found really interesting as well. I said one of the poems because it's so ingrained. No 2 mosquitoes ever land on a sheet of fly paper in quite the same way. Ever notice how one? So like, it's still there. Like, I've been programmed to remember these words. And we would have the self-expression weekend was we had to be the mosquito. So we would fly around the room, being a mosquito. And like the first time that we're trained to read it, then the coaches come in and they be the mosquito, and the coach from my training hit the roof and actually pushed the ceiling up because they were tiles. So that's how, that was an example for, no, this is what we mean by self-expression. So we had to then, or be the gypsy, the poem with the gypsy as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and
so we had to,
the guy with the soup. I don't remember the.
Yes. Oh, that will come to me. So we had to be the gypsy and be the waiter, and like that was self-expression. So then we could then go back to the introduction, to leading the introduction with this amount of enthusiasm. We had to be so charismatic. So the alteration in our being, we became the property of the company. And for me, what I can compare it to now is it's an artificial intelligence. So it is so foreign to my being that I become the property of this artificial intelligence that's embedded in my brain, in my cells. And to dismantle that like to undo it. That's what took me. It took me
Years,
very,
years and years and years. I mean, I think I'm still dismantling it, honestly. And maybe there'll be aspects that I never dismantle because I don't even see them. I don't know about you, Dale, but to an extent, I liked who I became in that work to an extent. And what has been shocking to me as I've been reverse engineering that process was in part like a lot of the stuff that I didn't get to do or become because I was it was better. I didn't go to school. I wasn't there with my kids. I didn't do, now I do therapeutic work, with my husband and really learning how to be in a relationship. And, there's like all this stuff. But there was something really good you were saying. And I was like, when you were talking about becoming the thing and becoming the energizer, God, I lost it. It'll come back because there was something I was going to share with you from the Being a Leader course where it kind of comes around full circle. If you study the origins, though, ultimately where all that started is your job was to become Werner. It was all about becoming Werner. Yeah, the whole
exactly. And that's, so just to interject a little bit, that's what I started to see clones.
Yes.
There was a point where I was in the center, I was really questioning what it was that I had agreed to. So I want to also talk about agreements, because that's our contract with the company. I started to question the agreements and what was happening within me. It's like there's something that happens at a cellular level of it's like being owned, which comes back to slavery. It's like let's put our thumbprint on a document without knowing where it's going, what the consequences are. And that's what we do with our
I just remember what I was saying. Exactly. So there's a thing, and I talk about it a tiny bit in my book, but the fuller story, it was with another colleague I was working with on this Being a Leader project. But when I say, Landmark threatens you. So, for example, when you sign certain licenses with Landmark, it's my understanding that you pretty much agree then that anything you create while you're a holder of that licensed IP becomes the property of Landmark. And the logic is because anything you create, because you've mastered their IP, their stance is that anything you create is derivative work of that and therefore belongs to them. So imagine having a license, you're running your own business, you're bringing in your own clients, you're giving a healthy percentage off for this IP. That's not entirely different. My husband and I used to run hotels. You get a choice hotel brand and you pay franchise fees for, but you get all this support, right? You get a whole organization that's sending you customers and all this stuff. So imagine that, but you don't have any of that support. You're paying for training. And anything that you create that is expansive or different or whatever, even if you go get it from some other certification and you then use it inside of your business, that becomes the property of Landmark. I mean, that's their argument. I don't think it's ever been tested in court and, pretty confident it wouldn't hold up. But this whole idea, when I heard that language, derivative work, somebody was telling me the story about how they were trying to say that anything she created would be derivative. And I was like, because when you leave Landmark, you're really paralyzed because they're telling you if you use even the same words, integrity, commitment, common words, that because, especially if you spend a long time and the more senior leader you are, there's like, you're using our IP and they threaten you, and, I believe an organization has the right to protect its intellectual property. I believe that artists should get paid for their creative works. It's not any different. So, I don't have any complaint with that, but they go so far overboard and they really tip into this thing that you're pointing to about you're kind of owned. So like what you think up while you're there is theirs because the stance they take is they couldn't possibly think up anything that was independent of what they've indoctrinated you in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really creepy.
I know. Well, if there's part of me, it's like it's really well thought out. It's actually, on one hand, it's quite brilliant. Like
it is very Machiavellian, right?
Yeah, it's the envy of every organization. And I think this is what draws companies to it as well. It's like, oh, yeah, I want that. You've got staff that are so productive you know, because we're all accountable and we're, you know, being our word and agreeing to, yes, I'll work overtime. I mean, my standard hours, 63 hours a week. So from 10 a.m.
That's a
to
starting
9
job. That's a full-time job. Yeah. 62,
10
62.
63. It was 10 a.m. until 9 p.m. Monday to Friday and 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. on Saturday. And then as a leader, I was highly encouraged. Like, it was not a done thing to not assist on top of that. So to take some leadership role, because the staff had to be leaders within the organization. We had to be representing Landmark in a really powerful way and living a life that we love and not being concerned about being tired, like working through this beingness is working through being tired, working through being angry or being upset.
You got to be unreasonable.
Being completely unreasonable, yeah. So then the amount of time, the intensity of the hours there, there's no gap or escape from this conversation and this way of being. There's just no gaps from it. And that's, you know, part of the leadership training where that people start getting into that area, and then you have to be a leader or you want to be on staff. Now that you've done the leadership training, you know all about the agreements, you can represent the company. How about, and this is where they start plucking from the one course, the forum where people enter, that's the doorway into every aspect of the company. So
yeah, you have the forum to do anything. Even now, their subscription service, if you want to do their subscription service, which I highly don't recommend, but if you do that,
what's a subscription?
So in their current reinvention, right? So they're sort of modernizing. Their ability to consistently be 15 years behind is stunning, actually. But so they're like now doing subscription service, right? At a time, I literally have some clients because I help, you know, I used to, I'm not doing this so much anymore, but people get their work out in the world. And that's what I did for Werner. So, you know, I made a go at doing that, post that. But when they're starting to create apps to counteract the thing you're doing, so you can now get an app that will unsubscribe you from everything you've subscribed to that you didn't want to be. So I was telling a client the other day, I said, when there is a product to stop the thing that you're starting, it's probably not the time to start it. Do you know what I mean? Right? It's like, no, because technology is now moving so fast, right? So they now have a subscription service, and the thing that's unique about their subscription service is $39 a month. Okay, that's great, except for you have to guarantee 1 year, so you cannot cancel it for a year. So it's actually whatever that is, $500 and some dollars, and there's no way to cancel it. And you know, and you get access to seminars, and I think I was just reading it yesterday, a self-expression and leadership program. I think there's some archives that they're planning to build out, special master classes. Like, they've really juiced it up. And, you know, and quite honestly, I'm kind of making fun of them, but it's really not on them. I work in the personal development industry, and this is like everybody's dream. Everybody's trying to sell you a software to create a membership program so that people will pay you monthly for your wisdom and your ideas. And I'm telling you, it's not any different than going to Hollywood and being discovered as the next best, hottest actress on the scene. Your chances of making it rich and off a subscription service as a general person is very tiny. Like, your chance of breaking through.
They are so far behind with technology. I mean, when I worked there, the internet didn't exist, and they were so anti the internet because the chances of being recorded, that the information can escape the company, are so great now. Like, it would just take somebody to install some software on the computer and to record the whole forum now that they're online. So they resisted it for so long. We were told, don't look at the internet, it's only for porn. And then I remember Roger Armstrong came in with a laptop. You know, we didn't have computers. Well, we had a computer just for printing. It was the old Microsoft DOS system, black screen, really, really old. People would laugh when they'd come in and have to use it. And then Roger Armstrong came in with a laptop, and we were just like, wow, what's this thing from America? Wow, this is a computer. And he showed me a video of somebody I remember there was somebody on a baseball stand they stood up and did a dance or something. And then he closed it. He turned it off. And I was like, oh my God, the whole world is changing. That's anybody, like anybody can do that now. And he's like, yep. And I was like, oh my God, everything is changing. And then I was thinking, well, Landmark's going to catch up. They have to catch up. They were like the last to introduce computers, and only because they had to. And then there's all of the controls. This is the issue, the proprietary secret. The proprietary model is it's a closed source. So the source is so closed and controlled by the central controllers. They are the ones who decide where the information goes, who it goes to. And then we have, on the other hand, out in the real world, we've got open source where everybody's sharing information. And people who are into computing are really into open source because it's a playground. They can learn.
But the whole thing was kind of like, not a lie exactly, because I think they're lying to themselves more than anybody. I mean, there's things they lied to us staff and us customers about. This isn't one of them. But at the same time, there's all this security and there's all this stuff around their proprietary materials, right? But you have volunteers, tens of thousands of them, who are at home registering people on credit card slips. I mean, I can't even tell you how many credit card files I had in my desk. You would go into the centers and, you might have 10, 20, 30 people in a larger center in each night, and they're all accessing one or two computers. They're not password protected, or if they are, they have a password that like everybody knows. And everybody kind of had, like, they really didn't understand privacy. So they were protecting the intellectual property like crazy. I mean, they have an insane legal department and like all this really aggressive. That's part of why people don't talk, because it's all been ingrained into us that we'll be sued, we'll be threatened, or we'll let out the secrets and then people will use it irresponsibly and whatever. There's all kinds of lore. But at the same time, their customer records, things like that, had zero security by what we would think of today. I mean, literally, you could walk into my desk at a dinner party and it would have, I mean, I tried to keep things in a folder, but because everything was done manual. And my business now, I own the business. And if you were to register in a program, I would never know your credit card number, ever. I can't even do that now. And in fact, the registration systems I have now will not even let me. I can buy certain add-ons that'll let me do this. But if you were to give me a credit card and I was going to register you, like, it doesn't even let me do that because there's so much security around our credit card numbers. So they actually had a giant data breach in 2022, I think.
I'm not.
Yeah,
it's these
a lot of these things.
Yeah, it's these incongruencies. Like, on the one hand, we're being owned by this company, and then on the other, there's still this self that I created, that I was born with, that's questioning. It's like, but there's something wrong here. This is why that, then this. Why can I be so protective of their material, but then show somebody else's credit card to somebody else? Why is that irrelevant? So people start to question these things that the company is trying to control continually. And as there's this lag with the modern world as they're trying to catch up, and then people leave. So that it's this churn and burn mentality as well. New people will come through who are more familiar with technology, that can start to train them up. It's like, it's a mess, actually. Like, it comes across as so well organized on one hand, but on the other hand, it's a mess. And especially now
you
into technology.
You said something earlier that I think is another really important myth to bust, which is, who wouldn't want these staff people? Well, I'll tell you, I've been away from Landmark since 2012, working in mostly academia, but also some businesses. And Landmark does not have a good reputation in general in the business world. It just does not. And, I've talked with people that are like, yeah, there's these certain qualities from people who have been on staff in Landmark. They're going to work really hard or whatnot. But honestly, we have to deprogram them and retrain them in order to make them productive in a normal work environment. And I'm going to tell you, Landmark staff members look busy, they look intense, but the results that they're producing per hour are terrible. That was one of the things when I was working, so as I was hosting the program for Werner, and he always travels, he's got this whole staff. And if they could find the longest, most complicated, convoluted, nonsensical way to get something done, they had it in triplicate. And I was just like pulling my hair out. I'm like, what? Why are you guys making this so utterly complicated? And I thought it was because he's a tough boss. You know, we were all indoctrinated in the ruthless compassion thing, which I now no longer believe in. It's total BS. We've done studies and we now know that freezing somebody's brain is not the way to get them to be productive. And unless you want to train people to murder people in war, you don't want to train people to override their fight or flight system. Like that doesn't, it's nonsensical. But he's always, you know, that's his method of training is a kind of personal terrorism. And so his staff is so discombobulated and disjointed. And I would see that. And my response, how I would respond to that is I would just became a caretaker. My teams and I would like store up food and feed them because they didn't have time for, you know, food and breaks and stuff. And I would later find out that they weren't allowed to take proper like per diem or proper reimbursement. So there we are at a Ritz-Carlton in Cancun, and they're only allowed to, you know, like whatever food they can scrap off, you know, from us, or they can only claim whatever they would have spent at home, for example. Like this is like insane policies. And so these people were like completely terrorized. But I thought I was looking at people who were confronted by a teacher trainer who was out to have them be the best they could be. And I remember the moment when I was talking with a attorney friend of mine, and I was talking about the verbal abuse that I experienced. You know, I saw a lot. And she's like, Anne, that's verbal abuse. And in some cases where threats were brought in and, you know, extra stuff, assault. And she described the difference to me. And I didn't recognize that. That's just, you know, and Werner told us, like, you're going to see me be really challenging to my people. He had us watch this Full Metal Jacket video and, you know, of a Marine drill sergeant. But it was all in the name of ruthless compassion and having them be the best. And that attitude is completely the staff environment in Landmark as well. It was much less in the wisdom area. I will confess it was much, much different there. I was not screamed at. My managers, I love them. To this day, I love them. I would love to hear from them and see what they think about what's going on now. And but in the centers area, which is run by Joan Rosenberg, Werner and Harry's sister, who, by all accounts, I've lost track. I mean, hundreds of stories of her verbal terrorism on people. And the belief that the way to produce is to, you know, process people, hold them to account, terrorize them. Now go take that person and try to put them in a normal corporate environment. They can't function. Most ex-staff members I know are incredibly challenged. It takes 5 to 7 years of therapy to have them be able to be functioning. They're living on very few, you know, have salaries that work. You know, you spend time floundering. That's what I was going through between 2020, the beginning of 2020, and, you know, right up to even now. Actually, I'm still struggling with that to a certain extent, writing my book, because you're told you're going to be the elite forces. You're going to be in high demand. You're going to have skills. You can outperform any normal, you know, non-graduate. Graduate is the Landmark term for a, you know, member, so to speak. You're either a graduate or non-graduate, right? And graduates are special people. And the implication is non-graduates are not. So that whole thing even is a snow job. Oh, you've gone mute somehow.
Sorry, what's a snow job?
Snow job is it's like when you cover something up with snow, I think is the direct reference. But basically, it's like you're hiding something. Right. You know, and it's pretty and it looks elegant and whatnot, but you're hiding something. You know, it's a con, like a con. It's kind of a con job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
you're going to become an elite person But really what you are is a traumatized, terrorized person who doesn't fit.
So this is, excuse me, this is why I titled this Life After Landmark, because the promise is that we will lead a life that we love and live it powerfully. That's what they're kind of pulling people in with. And yet I know for myself, I really, really struggled. Like there was nobody I could talk to. And the intention of this podcast is to encourage people, just come and talk. Like even if it's privately, just come and talk. Because I know when I did the interview with Chris Shelton, which was 3 hours, by the way, 3 hours, once I got the microphone, I just couldn't stop. I'm like, I'm going for it. And my world changed. Everything changed for me once, because it was like it was all in my head and it was driving me crazy for something like 15 years. I'd sought counsel, like I couldn't, counselors, I'd end up counseling them because nobody could relate to what I was saying. The only place I could find some source of sanity was with ex-Scientologists, because their worlds were so similar. I call Landmark Scientology light, because it's just
Yeah,
a light
you're not alone in that. Very,
yeah. But it was the speaking and the getting this out of my head, making it public, letting people know this is where I'm at with it, because it was so awkward. I didn't know what to put on my resume, that I'd work for Landmark or not, because they were just so, it was so conflicting. Everything, it was just so, it was just driving me crazy. So I thought I'll start this and get people to come and just chat, but nobody wants to talk, which is already an indicator that something is wrong.
Something's really wrong, right? Yeah.
We're encouraged to share. This is what the whole training is about, to share, to live our life powerfully, to open up, to talk about things that are not working. And yet nobody wants to talk. I've had awesome private conversations with people, just unwilling to go on air. So I'm thinking now, and you've shared also, there's another 2 podcasts that are out. People are starting finally to start talking. I'd love to, we've already been over an hour. There's so much to talk about. And I'd love to have some continuing conversations with you. There's already, like, I've got a list of questions from what we've spoken about today. I mean, so I think it would be time to close this one off, and have a look at when we can talk again. But do you mind sharing who else is talking? Where can they get more?
Yeah, so Brian Nord, one of the center's division directors, which you could think of as like a regional manager. So, 26 years, started when he was 20 years old, and has spent his whole life. He's now in his 40s, and and he's really grappling. He left just in November. And when he saw the next latest, greatest reinvention was going to be the same thing, and he was like, whoa, this isn't right. And so Brian Nord, he's started a great little podcast. We have a great little Facebook group. I call it book club, right? Is this a cult book club? So there's a lot of conversation going on in there. There's kind of a little screening process. We sort of make sure you're ready to hear. I'm not so worried about what you're going to say, but I want to make sure people are kind of ready to hear, because some people really upset. It was for me, when I started hearing all this stuff and learning about this abuse and so on, I was, like you said, you describe it as so well, like, it's like when you leave Landmark and you get out in the world, whether you experienced abuse or not, the world is a confusing place because you were told all this stuff and it's not like that. And you don't fit. You just kind of don't fit. And so a lot of the people who are talking in our private Facebook group and stuff are kind of, that's what they're dealing with, and how one of the things that happens in the Landmark culture is you're very, very, very taught that kind of everything is, you're the source of everything, but that is mostly everything that's going wrong, right? Like, so people die, people, whatever, you get hit by a bus, you're the source of that. Who were you being, like, it's just very confusing. So then you get out in the world and you're like kind of paralyzed. And, but yeah, so they're talking a young man by the name of Eric Rojas, he started participating when he was 15 years old. Like, he barely has a brain, and he was a staff member by 18. This will be a familiar story. And as I recall your story, it was kind of similar too. Like, we kind of get involved either in a time of great stress or very young, or probably both. And then, you get in this organization, people see you, they hear you, And it's very intoxicating. And then, and you're convinced that you can change the world. So who wouldn't want to do that? That's another similarity, by the way, between all kind of high control groups, LGATs, cultist groups, Nexium, Scientology, Landmark, all of them, even the major religions, they're all going to save the world through their methodology. Red flag, red flag, red flag. So I now know, didn't know that. So anyway, yeah, so they're talking, and we just started a safe practitioner workshop. So we're going to be starting a workshop. And, I'm telling people, I even have some people from Australia who are registered, and they're, because it's the middle of the night for them. So they'll be doing the recordings of the discussions. And if we have enough people, I'll set up some discussion times for people, because I want to make sure. But there's all these coaches and practitioners and wellness practitioners out there that have good hearts, and they do want to make a difference. And, Landmark's not the only problem. The whole industry has serious problems. So that's my passion. That's why I'm talking, because I now see a greater purpose than whatever purpose I was enrolled in that Landmark's about. So, which I no longer believe in, right? So, but I do believe that the personal development space is in the United States for sure, worse than anywhere. It's absolutely unregulated. Anything goes. People are literally dying. I mean, there are people who are dying, Seek Safely, who I've partnered with, her daughter died in an ill-run sweat lodge. And, it's dangerous. It's gotten dangerous. And
unregulated being the key word, because they navigate their way through the law in such a way that they can't be questioned. And that's a problem. That's a big problem. So here, let's ask the questions and let's start to get some answers, because that's a way.
And we're replicating, right? You can't question, and then you kind of see the success of a forum. So then people leave that and they go and they try to replicate that. But even the people who are leading the forum do not understand what they're leading. I promise you, I know many of them. They're very good friends. Like, they're great people for the most part. There's a few I have questions about, but mostly they're good people. They don't know that they're leading a large group awareness training and how that's impacting the brain and what's happening there and how those power dynamics are playing out. And there's just so much we know now we did not even know 20 years ago. So if we want to be as generous as we can be, assign all the best intentions, even with all that, the kind of training that Landmark does is just now, I believe, in today's world, not safe. It could be safe, but only if they come and understand the negative impacts and consequences, and rather than just inoculate so I don't get sued, like a protective stance, but take a proactive stance.
There's got to be an acknowledgement that there is an issue. And if people are not speaking, then it's like, no, everything's fine. Werner's just sitting on his little throne thinking, oh yeah, I succeeded. Look what I did in the world. No, there is an aftermath, and it's leaving people in a big mess. And I know that personally from all of the people that contacted me after Chris Shelton's interview. So, and you're being interviewed by him tomorrow as well. So
that's right. I'm very excited. Yeah, that, and yes, several different issues and whatnot. And now, like, what I've learned just since I hit publish on the book is just mind blowing. I mean, there's 2 or 3 other, because exactly like you're describing, hundreds of people are coming to me privately, and I love that. I'm happy to be here for people, and I hope that more and more people will take the advantage. You have not been sued. I have not been sued. Now, hopefully that is not an invitation for them to sue us. But that's a big threat. That's a big reason why people don't speak out. But the bigger reason is because they're afraid that if they speak out, then the forum will go away. And that's why I didn't speak. It took me 3 years. And I'm here to tell you, if the forum goes away tomorrow, we'll be just fine. In fact, we may even be better. It's okay. Those ideas live. The transformation lives. It lives in people like you and me and, countless others that have never even heard of Landmark. It's fine. But there's no amount of, to me, there's no amount of good that is justified by evil. That's justified by the abuse and whatnot. And that's the biggest thing that keeps people quiet, is they're like, But if I tell about that time that center manager strangled me, or I tell about the 100 hours a week, one, I'll be excommunicated from my family, because this becomes your whole life, all your people. I will cost the work, and that's reinforced all the time. I've, number of people now have been told, oh, well, if you stop, doing that thing, then you're, that city, that place, that country is no longer going to have access to transformation.
And there's also the threat. I was told that I would shrink.
Oh, yes, of course. You're going to become nothing, but not the good kind.
Yeah, that's right. Irrelevant, shrink. And actually quite the opposite has happened. I've really flourished from speaking. It's really since I started speaking that I'm able to sit back and look at it from a completely different angle and to be validated by other people. It's like, I'm not going crazy. This did happen. So I think it really is important to start sharing the experience, and I think we're opening up now a safe space for people to come and talk. And there were some great things that happened as well. So I'm really grateful for
and look, if you want to say
I'm applying it. I'm applying what I learned to in my life, and it's really working. So
exactly. And if you want to say landmark is its own lid, because they won't deal with these things. That's another thing I hear again and again. Oh, and I've heard that Harry's on all staff calls. It's the CEO. It's, oh, if Anne had just come to me. Hundreds of people have come to him. The people who came to me for help came to him first, and he declined to help. So, it's on and on and on. Hundreds and hundreds of people have gone all the way up to the Rosenbergs. And I love Brian Norm said it best. He said, there is somebody who can do something about it that's bigger than the Rosenbergs, that's bigger than, those are the C-suite, and that's the public. That's the public. If you believe in a capitalistic society, that is where the true accountability lies. And if your organization cannot survive the truth, your organization probably shouldn't survive.
Public scrutiny is the greatest disinfectant.
It is.
And anybody that's not willing to go to the test, then there's something wrong. And this is what the internet makes available, that very thing that they resisted for so long. If they can learn to use it in a way that has people flourish, then awesome. But if they're going to continue hiding secrets and stopping people from sharing, then it's just not going to work in today's world.
Nope.
Yeah. Nope. We've transformed. Okay, so we'll sign off, and I'll put links to your book, the podcasts, your conversation with Chris Shelton tomorrow, so that people can go forward and learn more. And we'll definitely be talking again, because there's just...
Oh, I would love, I'll send you the Safe Practitioner Workshop. Ginny Brown and I at Seek Safely and the Browns family, we've really partnered up on that. Like, let's start learning as consumers. We're never going to get rid of all the narcissistic, crazy people in organizations. We're just not. And but we can start educating ourselves about how to not feed those monsters, how to avoid them, how to get the value and leave the yucky behind. Like, we're going to be talking about all of that in that workshop in our consumer products. So I'll make sure you have the links. Very excited about cooking up.
Really great. Well, this is an awesome first conversation. Thank you very, very much.
Well, I look forward to more. Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful.
I have so many friends in Australia. Hi, everybody. I know this will be heard everywhere, but you have connections
there. Okay, awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll schedule the next one.
Okay.
Thanks.